As the United States faces the problem of terrorism, that bipartisanship is very important. While there clearly are a lot of questions, which I'm sure we'll get into, that part of the point here is that America needs to come together to fight terrorism. And what we have discussed is that it's important to use military force, there's no question about that, and that we need to be prepared to deal with the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda group, the extremists, in a very strong, forceful way using our military. But that also there are a lot of other tools that are available and need to be used in a more coherent way. And it requires us to understand our other sources of power, which are obviously made up of our diplomacy, our understanding of the history and cultures of the countries that we're dealing with, using the ability to educate, talking about the importance of democracy, generally understanding that there's a much larger role for dealing with the roots of terrorism, and then also saying that this is not something that we can and should do alone, that just by its very nature, terrorism is something that requires international cooperation. And it requires intelligence sharing, it requires police activity together, it requires the building of alliances and the importance of dealing with this as an international issue. So it certainly recognizes the importance of force, but it also underlines the essential aspects of dealing with the root causes through other means.
I don't know about the rest of you, but in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, I've had sort of deja vu in thinking, just seeing the outpouring of aid offers from countries around the world. I think the toll as of yesterday was over 90. That was the same thing that happened after 9/11. There was tremendous goodwill and desire to reach out to the United States. And I thought since 9/11, we had established better working relationships with many governments, including, for instance, in Uzbekistan with President Karimov. Do you think it was a mistake, perhaps, to make the war on terror sort of the centerpiece of our foreign policy?
I think in some ways, yes, but we did have to, let me just say this. After 9/11, I think most of us agreed that it was absolutely essential to do what President Bush did in Afghanistan, that there was no question that one had to go and hit the area from whence the terrorists came. And there was a time, because there was such an outpouring of disgust and horror in the United States and in other countries, that it was appropriate to decide that we were going to deal with this huge new threat. I have to tell you, frankly, we have had many discussions among the people who love to talk about foreign policy endlessly as to whether it's wise or not to make terrorism the central aspect of your foreign policy. It clearly is a defining aspect, and 9/11, all of us know as we're coming up to the anniversary, know what a total change it made in America's attitude towards the terrorists, towards other countries, towards how we dealt with our own domestic policy. But whether it's wise to have made it central is another question, because what it has done is, I think, really coalesce in a way that was wrong what Iraq was about, which was, I think, kind of piggybacked on a lot of aspects of terrorism. It certainly was a problem, but it was not solely that. And then to kind of make everything revolve around terrorism, to some extent, gives a lot to the terrorists, who now know that they are central to our lives. So it clearly is essential, but I don't think it should be the only aspect of our foreign policy.
Do you think, just kind of going back to the Uzbekistan example, because there you have President Karimov, and most recently with whatever happened in Andijan, depending upon who you ask, whether or not there was a slaughter, the Bush administration has had a somewhat restrained response to that. Do you think perhaps that in effect, by not putting human rights as prominently giving human rights as prominent a place in our foreign policy, that we have, in effect, allowed our response to become yet another excuse for people to join up with these Islamic extremist groups?
We were desirous of having some relationship with Uzbekistan, and I met with President Karimov and the foreign minister, and we were talking about their various issues. And one, I remember, was the question, and I met with a lot of human rights activists and women's groups, and I think you then must have been a part of many of those meetings. And what was evident already then was that there was a struggle between those who wanted to speak out, but who were identified as being counter to the regime, and therefore considered as dangerous and potentially destabilizing to the government. And I was very concerned that everybody who was kind of activist Muslim was being viewed in that particular way by the government. On the other hand, there also was discussion about the threat to the north, the influence of Russia on Uzbekistan continuing. And so it was the question about fear of the so-called South, of the Muslim nationalism, and the fear of the north of the Russian imposition. And we wanted to have a relationship with Uzbekistan, which in fact should never have been viewed as anti-Russian. It was just a matter of being for the independence of Uzbekistan. And we began already trying to establish a way that they could help fight terrorism, and there would be some kind of a cooperation. But even then, I think there was a concern about how you define a terrorist, whether a terrorist is just somebody that you happen to object to, which was a little bit my sense with President Karimov. So what I have been concerned about, if you do make terrorism as the central aspect of your foreign policy, is that you give a carte blanche to those who say they are fighting terrorism. That has been my concern with President Putin and Chechnya. That has been my concern with President Karimov and those who then say, well, we're just cooperating with you because we're all in this together and we're fighting terrorists.
Or you've got your Al-Qaeda terrorists,
Right.
we have our
this.
Chechen terrorists.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to be very concerned if it becomes so central that we forget other aspects of our policy, and if we forget what actually I believe is America's role, which is to set an example, to believe in human rights, and to believe in democracy.